Now, President Putin has declared a 3-day unilateral ceasefire in the war in Ukraine. It's to begin on the 8th of May, coinciding with events to mark the 88th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany in the Second World War. The Kremlin says it's ready to hold peace talks without preconditions, but it's not agreed to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire originally proposed by Washington and which Ukraine backed. Meanwhile, the US President Donald Trump has said he thinks his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, is willing to give up Crimea to Russia as part of a peace deal, despite Kyiv's previous rejection of any such proposal. Asked if he thought the Ukrainian president was ready to cede control of its southern peninsula, which was illegally annexed by Russia in 2014, President Trump said he thinks so. He also urged the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, to stop shooting and sign a deal to end the fighting, suggesting this could be achieved within a couple of weeks.
I think the meeting went well. We'll see what happens over the next few days. We'll probably learn a lot. I was very disappointed that missiles were flying by Russia, but that missiles were flying. Very disappointing. We'll see how it goes. On the Iran situation, I think we're doing very well. I think a deal's going to be made there. That's going to happen. Pretty sure it's going to happen. We'll have something without having to start dropping bombs all over the place.
Trust President Putin.
Can't.
Is Zelensky ready to give up Crimea, do you think, Mr. President?
Oh, I think so, yeah. Look, Crimea was 12 years ago. That was President Obama. They gave it up without a shot being fired. So don't talk to me about Crimea. Talk to Obama and Biden about Crimea. I see him as calmer. I think he understands the picture. And I think he wants to make a deal. I don't know if he wants to make a deal. I think he wants to make a deal.
President Trump. Meanwhile, North Korea has admitted for the first time that it deployed troops to fight for Russia in the war with Ukraine. State media in Pyongyang said the soldiers were sent to repel Ukraine's cross-border attack into Russia's Kursk region, which began last year. In an article on the front page of its state newspaper, Kim Jong-un praises his troops for their heroism in pushing back Ukrainian forces. Thousands of North Korean soldiers are thought to have been killed or injured in the fighting. Until now, both Moscow and Pyongyang have been silent about their cooperation on the battlefield in Kursk, despite multiple intelligence reports from the US and Ukraine that more than 10,000 North Korean soldiers have been deployed there. Well, for more on developments around Ukraine, let's speak now to the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, who joins me on the line from London. Great to see you as always, Dr. Laskiewicz. Let's start with the news that broke a few hours ago. President Putin declaring a 3-day truce beginning on the 8th of May. How significant is that?
Well, it's not very significant in terms of it being a move towards a peace treaty, but it's very good PR for him because, one, it underlines how Russia defeated Nazi Germany, which is good both internally in Russia and abroad. Two, it shows he has the power. It's his decision whether to fight or not. So it kind of confirms his superior role in this. And three is what President Donald Trump likes. He likes ceasefires. And so he's gratified him. President Putin has gratified Donald Trump by calling this ceasefire. Moreover, it also comes the moment when apparently the Russians have taken back all of the Kursk incursion zone. It's not necessarily entirely true. There appear to be reports of individual Ukrainians here and there, but that's not the point. The point is it shows how he has now recovered all Russian territory as a Russian leader, if he feels should, and therefore feels in a stronger position. So all in all, it's an excellent PR, but I can't see this of itself leading to a peace treaty.
And to sort of back that 3-day truce up, the Kremlin saying it's ready to hold peace talks without preconditions. But then it's not agreed to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire originally proposed by Washington, which Ukraine has backed. I mean, does that sound somewhat contradictory?
In fact, Russia has never gone for the ceasefire route. It has always wanted a comprehensive peace settlement. It doesn't like ceasefires. The reason why it doesn't like it is because it feels that Ukraine will regroup better than it can. Whilst it is pressing forwards, whilst it is winning, Ukraine finds it harder to regroup. That's why it doesn't really like long ceasefires. So there's nothing new about this. It has never wanted them. The key point is about the preconditions is Russia thought that in the previous ceasefire about the Baltic Sea, it might be able to get something out of it, namely lifting of some sanctions. This did not work, and so therefore Russia is under no illusions that to go forward with any conditions at all would be impossible, and therefore it has stated this. But please note, it does not mean that Russia has abandoned any of its goals or any of the points it wants to secure. It simply means that it's not a precondition of the talks that the Ukrainians and Americans agree with them.
And I wonder what you make, Dr. Laskiewicz, of what President Trump said, that he thinks Ukraine is now willing to give up Crimea to Russia as part of a peace deal.
Yes, that's a very interesting, isn't it? The entire meeting between President Trump and Zelensky is the Russia's nightmare, because obviously they went off just as you wish, a sort of accidental meeting, incidental one, and suddenly they managed to exchange 15 minutes in a calm manner. And in this, President Donald Trump has seen some give in Zelensky's position, which previously there was none. And clearly, Zelensky is doing it as follows. He is making clear that he is prepared to abandon some of his goals in return for the big ones, which is to say that Russia stops fighting. It is not clear whether he has agreed in any way permanently about Crimea, nor is it clear, not a word has been said about it, about all the other territory which Russia holds. So it is an interesting sentence, it is an interesting development, but by no means of fundamental importance. We've yet to see whether anything emerges from this.
Well, based on what you just said, Dr. Laskiewicz, if Ukraine were willing to give up Crimea, or at least acknowledged de facto Russian control of Crimea, but not the other parts of Ukrainian territory that have been seized by Russia, do you think that would be enough for Moscow to sign up to any agreement?
No, I doubt it. I think Moscow is quite clear. It wants that territory. It is said that Crimea has always been Russian. It needs the land bridge through Crimea through Mariupolis. And also it wants the Donetsk and so on, because it says Russians live there. I can't honestly see them agreeing. The key point is, if Ukraine is prepared to give up Crimea, is that it pressurizes the Russians in Donald Trump's eyes. So that's the important point. But per se, in itself, it will not suffice. Moreover, the very fact the Russians have shown no signs of giving up the land bridge is in itself a serious point, because there are other corridors, to give it another name, which the Russians are interested in, according to my book anyway, like the Suwalki corridor in Poland. So therefore, the fact that they've shown no give on that point is a serious matter.
And we've had the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying the U.S. could walk away from ceasefire negotiations potentially this week. Is that likely to put pressure on Russia to agree some kind of deal, or would Russia probably even potentially welcome the U.S. withdrawal from negotiations?
Actually, Russia would welcome it. Either the US gives Russia what it wants, or it walks away. Either of these two options are music to Russia's ears. The real problem is if America stays on, stays supplying arms to Ukraine, which will make any victory very hard and any fighting very costly in terms of both blood and money. And so therefore, no, that this threat is really a threat for Ukraine, not for Russia. and Zelensky is quite alert and alive to it. However, judging by what President Donald Trump has said, they're not likely to walk away at present. Were they to walk away, incidentally, this will be more in keeping with what I predicted. So that still is an option. But as it stands, he's indicated there's going to be another week or two negotiations, and he's going to hang on in there. So USA is not going to leave immediately.
I wonder if you've noticed an interesting change in tone from President Trump when it comes to talking about the Ukrainian and Russian leaders. I mean, a few months ago, he referred to Zelensky as a terrible leader and a dictator. Now he's talking about him doing a good job, and he's talking publicly about his disappointment about how President Putin is conducting the war. I mean, I wonder what you make of that change of tone and whether you think it runs deep.
I think it is significant in one sense. He is prepared to talk to Zelensky, whereas previously he thought Zelensky was a complete yo-yo, and that's no longer the case. So yes, that is one point. He was very disappointed by Russia's attack on civilians, which, although the Russians asserted they were actually firing at a military target, and that therefore in this respect, his views have changed somewhat. Have they changed entirely? Hard to say. The key point is what happens now. We've yet to hear what Donald Trump says about the 3-day ceasefire, though, as I've said, I don't think it's very important. But it is now quite clear President Donald Trump is prepared to speak with President Zelensky. His key words were that he found President Zelensky much calmer in his speech there at the airport. And I think that as a result, this is a move which is significant and which means that his total support, or near on total support for President Putin as opposed to President Zelensky, that has changed.
And as we mentioned at the outset, we've had North Korea admit for the first time that its troops have been helping Russia fight the war in Ukraine, and specifically helping to kick out the Ukrainians out of that Russian region of Kursk. What do you make of the public admission of this by the North Koreans? I mean, what might it signal?
It signals that they think they've won. The point about it is they didn't want this to be known anywhere because the initial onslaught by the North Korean troops was not very successful. However, since they've gone into the field and are fighting, they have learnt a lot. This, by the way, is by no means unusual. Every single army in the world, when it starts a war, witness the Russian one, for example, fights badly and then learns as it goes on. And so therefore now they feel they've notched up a victory. They now can openly state, because had they done so before, people have openly said North Korean troops aren't very good, whereas that's no longer the case. On the whole, it's quite clear that the North Korean troops were useful to the Russians. They made good allies, made good soldiers, and the freeing of the Kursk incursion zone would have been a lot longer without them, if possible at all.
And I think you might have touched on this briefly earlier, Dr. Laskiewicz, but the Russians said a couple of days ago that Ukrainian forces are now out of Kursk completely. Is that a fact?
Yes and no. It is yes in the sense there's no formal area controlled by them, but no in the sense that they can still penetrate the area at will. They also apparently hold up in various odd places, like in some ravines or so on, which are hard for the Russians to clear out. This is, of course, minor stuff. And therefore, on the whole, President Putin is correct in stating that he has recovered the territory, but nonetheless is there and gives the Ukrainians this point that they are not entirely finished, because obviously the fact they've been kicked out of the Kursk almost entirely, if not entirely, has been a significant defeat, because although it seems a long time ago, it was supposed to have been a war winner. President Zelensky did say it was a key move. It will divert Russian forces and it would help win the war. Whereas what has actually happened has been a total disaster. And the splitting of the Ukrainian forces is one reason why the Russians have captured yet more territory, incidentally, about the size of the Kursk incursion zone, whilst the Ukrainians were busy in this I think, wild goose chase, because I was one of the people, I'm not the only one, who thought the entire invasion was mad.
Thank you, Dr. Laskiewicz. Brilliant, as always, talking with you. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the International Affairs Analyst. He was talking to me on the line there from London.